Hello and welcome to a brand new video. Today's is going to be about my models, my scale model building. It's snuck its way into a few of my videos, and some of the cars have as well. You probably recognize, well, at the very least, the white Hillman Avenger that I have, which is pictured appropriately from the back. And I have the Sunbeam Talbot. I think possibly I've had that in videos before, and a couple of others. But the cars are placed in a scene that I designed a few years ago. This building is actually based on a British car dealership. It's based on like an Austin garage. And the reason I did that is because it was going to feature a bunch of British cars. Right now functioning as a Riley dealership. It's got some Riley cars inside there. I didn't want to just randomly design a building based on like my own precedent in my mind, because I'm American, and American car dealerships have a certain style and a certain look to them. And so I wanted it to be like I wanted it to look like a British car dealership, to at least be able to be convincing. And so I just did a lot of research looking for some really good photographs of some classic British car dealers, and I found this building that was on a street corner, and it had an angled corner on it, and it had a bunch of Austins in it. It was basically a 1950s scene, and next to it was a garage, like a full-sized service center was right next to the building. I didn't put that in, obviously. I just used that as inspiration to sit down and design my own little building, which is what this is. And the little parking shelter next to it was meant to feature a few more cars. The main function of this, besides being a display case, is to protect the cars from the indoor precipitation, which is, basically dust. So I'm really lazy and bad about dusting off my cars. So I designed this little building so that it would shield them from the dust. And since doing it, I've never had to dust the cars that are inside the building. So I'm going to move in a little bit closer here so that you can see some of the cars that I have parked. I have possibly my personal favorite is this red Austin. It's an A40 Farina. And I like this car especially from the rear. It's kind of one of my favorite rear styles. And it's a really neat car. Then I have this black Sunbeam Talbot. It's a Sunbeam Talbot 90, and at the time that was on sale. And I was collecting British cars at the time, so I just thought, hey, why not? I think it was $29 or something like that from an American company. And so that's what that is. And it wasn't a car I was necessarily looking for, but I liked the model, so I bought that. And my Avenger. And the Avenger was like I just bought it from somebody's eBay store. It was just a used car they had. It doesn't have any mirrors on it or anything. I actually like it for that. I actually don't really like the wing mirrors that they put on these. I prefer them to not have them, and it's easier to dust them. So I really love this little Avenger. Under the shelter we have a couple Wolsleys. This here is a Wolseley 1550 from the 1950s on the right. The kind of it's more of a burgundy color, but I don't think you can tell in this shot. And then on the left is a Wolseley Hornet. And they even did a really nice job with the badge on here, the Wolseley badge on this car. I'm trying to do the best to hold it still here on the camera. But yeah, this little car, I think, is a Vitesse model, possibly. And Vitesse models are kind of inexpensive, and they're really nice. So I recommend grabbing a few of those if you are collecting scale cars. These are 1/43 scale, all of these. So you may be wondering, how about the building? And yes, this building is in exactly 1/43 scale. I designed it in Google SketchUp, which I'll show you, the windows, for example, all of these, the tall glass here, each window section, I think of the main 3 or 4 there, are 7 feet wide and 7 feet high. They're an exact square, so they're 7 feet. And the door is, you can see that's a standard door height. That's going to be a 6'8" door, and the width, it's a double door, so each of those would be 2'9". And so in 143 scale, that's whatever it works out to be. I've kind of forgotten. Just showing from above a little bit, the roof, you see I have some rooftop forms on here, and the architectural style of this is kind of like a neo-Corbusian modernist style, which is definitely was popular in Britain at the time, and it's popular with me. I mean, this is kind of the style I like to design things in. The black trim of the windows against the white building is definitely was used in a lot of really famous modern buildings in Britain. I have several books on British modern architecture. It was kind of a very unique take on modernism that happened over in the UK, and the American take is its own thing as well. But this is trying to be something unique. This was my own idea of how to do the road. What I did after building the base, which is in this compressed, I think 3/16 inch board, is I actually went to the hardware store and I just found some sandpaper that was black. I was looking for more of a dark gray, but I'm actually glad now that I used black. I think that's even better. And so I just bought a package of black sandpaper and used the X-Acto knife, which is really what you use to build the building. For anything in modeling, you're going to use those pen knives. And I just very carefully cut the pieces of this to fit them on here, glued them down to make a road that's nice and gritty and rough. And the scale of it works out really well. The scale of the grit, and how realistic it looks for the cars. And then I just used black paint to do the joints to make that look realistic. It's more or less what they do on the real roads. They're using the black tar, it's the black paint, same sort of thing. So the sidewalk here is just the same exact wood that this base is made out of. I would have cut that as a square, and then I just rounded it off. I probably spent a couple hours sanding that to round it. If you look very carefully at the curb between where the Austin is parked and where the Wolseley is, you can see it drops down a little bit. So again, that was more just a lot of sanding. I just sanded that and just sort of made it drop down a little bit so that it would give the cars kind of a ramp up on the concrete so that they can park there under the shelter. The little retaining wall behind there was like an afterthought. I just threw it in. And you can see you can tell there's some warpage there on the roof of the car shelter. And that's because I've learned my lesson. I painted it after I glued it down, which was a big mistake. When you're building these models, you have to cut everything first in the correct size, and then you paint it, and then you have to compress it down after it dries, and then glue it together. The reason being is that once you have glued this together and then paint it, if it warps when it's glued together, you cannot undo the warp unless you break it apart. So I think that's why there's a little bit of a warp on there. And now to show you how it actually works, the rooftop forms on here actually functions as a handle so that the roof can come off like this, and then there's the cars inside. That's how it works. You can't put them in from the front. Those don't open. And if you look carefully inside of here, you can see that I have these columns in here. Right here, there's one right here, and there's another one that's harder to see right here on the edge. So this is actually a true curtain wall building. I designed it so that all of this is not structural. It's not holding up any roof. It's barely holding itself up. These are all kind of just hang together. The glass is slid in behind. The roof is being held up by these columns, and then this is sort of a column fared into a wall, really, right? And that's how it functions, which is the way that a modern building works. It's not the walls that hold up the roof, it is pilotis or columns. I had to very carefully, this only goes in one way, and that's how it works like that. So I use SketchUp Pro, as you can see on here. It's Pro 2018. That's because that's the year that I actually bought the license. And the Pro license on SketchUp costs north of $700. There isn't a need necessarily to pay that much for a license. What you can do if you want to just play around with it is you can use the online version, and the online version should be free. At least it was free when I used it, and it is actually quite capable. You can actually do quite a bit on the online version of SketchUp. And if you're just going to use it to plan a model like that and for dimensions and things, which is really what I did with mine, then you can pretty much use the online version. You don't have to worry about anything. The only problem is that you don't get any files that you can keep. You don't have anything that you can print. So you can't use it to build your own house unless you're an architect. You have to have an architect or an engineer sign off on any drawings that you produce out of this. But if you're not planning on going that far with it, you're going to do just fine using the online version. So here's the building, and you can see that I really followed the design pretty much exactly. I think the only thing that I didn't quite do is the detail of the little office in the interior. You can see how inside it looks like I was planning to do an office with kind of like a glass window here, and then the desk would be inside there. So I didn't quite do that. I just have an open desk, but other than that, I followed this pretty much exactly. You can see the window frames, and it's all the same dimensions. And the way to get the dimensions on here, there's a tool right there, the dimension tool. If I click on that, I can call out a dimension anywhere I want. Right here, and you can't really read that, so then I can just bring it up. There you go. That glass in between that door frame is 3 feet exactly. So that's a commercial size door. That's actually a pretty big double door. And then the height, I didn't like in putting the dimensions on, I didn't call out every single length. You can see I left some of them to be like I didn't call that one out because I did this piece to fit, because there was no way that I was going to get an exact dimension. You can see the height of the entire window frame is 7'4" from the ground to the top of the frame, but if you count just the glass, it is actually exactly 7 feet. And these two windows are not 7 feet wide. They're actually smaller, but it gives you an illusion. It makes it appear that they're all the same width, but they're not quite the same exact width. And the way I did it is that I used real dimensions. I left the lady in here who's she's like the avatar that is used for scaling. And I actually, a lot of people like to just, knock that out. You can, get rid of her pretty easily, just delete. But I leave these in here for scale. And it's really fun if you have you design like a super tall tower or something, and you get this big building and you have this little tiny person standing next to it. Having her here, she stands right next to the door. That's how tall a person would be in front of a one-floor building. And ceiling heights. The ceiling heights are a proper ceiling height. I think these are 8-foot ceilings. Let me check. I'm going to pretend to draw a line here with a pencil and see what it tells me it is. Yep, it's exactly 8 feet. So the ceiling is 8 feet. So I did real dimensions throughout, and then I translated them, or I scaled them to 43 scale. Because a scale model is going to be built to the inch, not to the foot, I converted each of these dimensions into inches and then divided by 43. And some of the dimensions look a little bit crazy. As an example here, 21 foot 6. So what does that end up being? So 21 foot 6 is 21 and a half feet. Multiply by 12 to get the inches. 258 divided by 43 is exactly 6 inches. So even though some of the dimensions look kind of crazy, I know that I designed this so that some key dimensions turned out even. So that piece there turned out exactly even, that piece. And I think the same was done with the parking shelter length. You see how right there I use the same length. It's 21 foot 6. So you see how, and that for me is like a design thing. I used 21 and a half feet here. I used 21 and a half feet here. And then the depth of the whole building is 18 feet. And that translates to 5 inches, 5.023. And that is like 5 and barely like a 16th, a little bit more than 5 and a 16th. That dimension there, the 18 feet, works out to be almost exactly 5 inches. 21 and a half feet works out to be exactly 6 inches. So there's a few dimensions in here that I chose because they would work out and be even in 43 scale. So that's how I did that. That's that building. And
so yeah, the model is it's a custom design. There's no prefabricated purchased parts or anything in here. This is all made out of modeling wood, and compressed wood is and it's also a modeling thing you buy at a model store. And then I just kind of came up with using the sandpaper and a lot of paint, obviously. And so that is my major car model, one of my best scale models.